In part 1 of this theory, I explained why I believe the spirit in the horned statue is actually the happy mask salesman. The problem is, the implications of this theory go well above just these two characters being the same, expanding into a theory that stretches across the entire Legend of Zelda series. Something I never even thought would happen when I initially had the idea of the statue and the salesman. At the end of part 1, I left you with 3 questions. What god is Jerrin referring to when she says the spirit inside the statue is a god? If the salesman is in the statue, then how does being a god relate to him? And what is the true relationship between the salesman, horned statue, and bargainers? In this video, I'll answer these questions, and possibly even give answers to existing theories as well. Who really is trapped inside the horned statue? Who really is the happy mask salesman? Let me tell you about a character who has been hiding in plain sight this entire time, who can only be seen through a lens of truth. In Breath of the Wild, the spirit in the horned statue refers to itself as a dealer in life and power, and in the original Japanese, as a god. In Tears of the Kingdom, Jerrin agrees with this idea, and she gives Link all the information she has on the statue. If we examine this information, we can figure out exactly who this god is. A dealer in life and power, touched by the wrath of the goddess, fallen to ruin. Jerrin is saying what we've already learned from the statue in Breath of the Wild. His bargaining for souls angered Hylia, and she trapped him in the statue. As there is a goddess of light, then it follows that she would have an opposite, the horned god. If Hylia is the goddess of light, then whatever god is in the statue, if it really is a god, would be her opposite, which would mean the god of darkness. And while this might make you again think of demise, since in classic storytelling, darkness is usually associated with evil, demise doesn't fit the profile of whoever's in the statue, like I talked about in part 1. The other thing is, darkness doesn't automatically mean something is evil. It could be referring to the element of darkness, like we've seen in the series before. Like light and dark, one cannot exist without the other. Their power manifests through the other's existence. This is the most important line that Jerrin gives us. Jerrin's overall dialogue implies a sort of balance between the two beings, leading me to believe that Hylia and the spirit are of an equal or similar power level. But more importantly, if one cannot exist without the other, then that means as long as Hylia has been around, so too has the spirit, implying all the way back before Skyward Sword. If it's not demise in the statue, then that means the spirit is a third god. If what Jerrin says is true, then that means during the battle between Hylia and Demise, this god of darkness was there as well. So then, what does it mean if these 3 gods all existed together at this point in time? Yes, I'm referring to Demise as a god and not a demon, for reasons I'll explain in a second. But why is it a big deal to have these 3 together? Well, turns out they may have been based on another trio, from one of the biggest influences of the Legend of Zelda series, Shinto. For this theory, we need to look at the 3 most important gods of the Shinto religion, collectively known as the 3 precious children. Amaterasu, the god of the sun, Susanoo, the god of storms, and Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon. There are multiple versions of their origins, In one story, they were created when their father washed himself after returning from the land of the dead to see his wife. Amaterasu came from his left eye, Tsukuyomi from his right eye, and Susanoo from his nose. Another story says these three gods actually came from mirrors their father was holding. And one final story just says they came from their mother and father. These gods are important for this theory because if we take Jerrin's information and conclude that before Skyward Sword existed Hylia, Demise, and the spirit in the statue, they line up very closely to the three precious children of Shinto. Amaterasu seems to be the inspiration for Hylia. Amaterasu, the sun god, is considered the chief deity of Shinto. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Hylia is the one most people in Hyrule worship. Amaterasu's father appointed her the ruler of heaven, just like how Hylia was appointed the guardian of the Triforce. Amaterasu is the god of the day and the sun, and Hylia is the goddess of light. Amaterasu is also known as the protector of Japan, like how Hylia was the protector of Hyrule when she protected the people of the land against Demise and his demon tribe. It is also said that the Japanese royal family is descended from Amaterasu, just like how the Hyrulean royal family is descended from Hylia. Susanoo, the storm god, is said to be a wild and destructive god. His father appoints him the ruler of the seas, but in many stories he's kicked out of heaven. One story says it's because he wept to see his mother in the underworld, and his crying caused destruction in the lands below. Another story says this destruction was just part of his nature. And one final story says he was kicked out of heaven because he was being a dick. It doesn't really say that, but he was causing the gods a lot of trouble. Susanoo appears to be the inspiration for Demise, being a wild and destructive being who causes trouble for the gods. In Shinto, Amaterasu and Susanoo are known for having a rivalry, like the rivalry we see between Hylia and Demise in Skyward Sword. We're also told during the intro that Demise emerged with his demon tribe from underground. Susanoo does travel to the underworld, whether it's to live with his dead mother or because he was banished there. The reason why I call Demise a god and not a demon, besides possibly being inspired by a god, is that on his sword you can see an inverted Triforce. Because the Triforce symbolizes the gods, this could mean that Demise himself is a god and not a demon, but its inversion is meant to represent him turning against the gods. Another example of this technique is shown by the masks of the Yiga. The inverted Sheikah eye is meant to represent their separation from the Sheikah and their opposition to the main group. If Demise is based on Susanoo, then maybe he was originally a good god. Susanoo being jealous of Amaterasu is an idea in some Shinto stories. So maybe Demise was banished from heaven because he was jealous of Hylia being appointed to protect the Triforce instead of himself. Or maybe he was banished because of his violent nature. His banishment may have led him to the underworld, and this is why he eventually emerges from underground, as we are told at the start of Skyward Sword. So if the Legend of Zelda takes heavy influence from Shinto, and we have Hylia, who represents Amaterasu, and we have Demise, who represents Susanoo, and the information from Jerrin suggests that there was also a third god to complete this trio, then following the logic, the spirit in the horned statue is really a god who represents Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of information on Tsukuyomi in Shinto. He is the god of the moon and the night. His name translates to moon reading, which was a popular event for nobles where they would gaze at the moon and read poetry. He was also popular with the nobility because he was a big fan of etiquette and rules, but he was willing to do unethical things to enforce those rules. It's been suggested he was also a god of agriculture and time, since up until the late 1800s, Japan used a lunar calendar, and he was married to Amaterasu. If we compare Tsukuyomi to the spirit in the horn statue, we can see just how much they line up with each other. Tsukuyomi was created by his father at the same time as Amaterasu and Susanoo. Jerrin tells us, when referring to Hylia and the spirit, that one cannot exist without the other. As long as Hylia has been around, so too has the spirit, which would then have to mean that they were both created at the same time, along with Demise as well if we're saying that Demise is Susanoo. As there is a goddess of light, then it follows that she would have an opposite. Tsukuyomi is considered the counterpart or opposite of Amaterasu. He came from his father's right eye, or his right hand mirror, as opposed to Amaterasu coming from the left. Tsukuyomi is thought to be a male, as Amaterasu is female, and being the god of the moon and the night, is of course the opposite of Amaterasu being the god of the sun and the day. This is what Jerrin means by the goddess's opposite. Not good and evil like Hylia and Demise, but instead literal light and dark, day and night, sun and moon. If our spirit in the statue is this god, that would also explain the aura of darkness which emanates from the statue, being the god of darkness or the god of the moon for the series. Also, following rules and etiquette makes sense when you're making business deals, respecting the art of buying and selling, being polite and respectful, as we see from the horn statue when he's bartering with Link's soul, and the act of manipulating souls could definitely be considered unethical, as Tsukuyomi is known to have done unethical things. In the main story about Tsukuyomi, Amaterasu is invited to a feast held by another god, but sends the moon deity in her place. This other god produces food for the feast from her own body, and viewing this act as indecent, since like I mentioned he's kind of a big fan of etiquette and rules, Tsukuyomi kills her. When he returns to heaven and tells Amaterasu what happened, she's disgusted. She labels him an evil god and forever separates from him. This story is how Shinto explains why the moon always follows the sun. It's Tsukuyomi trying to be with Amaterasu, but can never be again. We see a similar thing with the spirit in the horn statue. His bargaining with the souls of the people of Hyrule upset Hylia, and so she punishes him by trapping him in the statue. The villagers treat the statue with neglect and disrespect, and assume the statue is a demon or is evil. Jerrin's line of a god being touched by the wrath of the goddess, fallen to ruin, can apply to Tsukuyomi just as much as it applies to the horn statue. Despite the similarities between the horn statue and the devil from Western religions, these connections I've just talked about are why I believe the spirit in the horn statue is the equivalent of the Shinto god Tsukuyomi, the spirit being the god of the moon, of the night, of darkness, the opposite of Hylia. If the series does include a god of the moon, what's his purpose? Why does he exist and what's he been doing this entire time? By looking at evidence and information, we can fill in the blanks and uncover the profile for this elusive figure. The story of Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo gives us this idea that they had specific roles in the universe. Amaterasu the sun god is put in charge of heaven, Tsukuyomi the moon god is put in charge of the night, and Susanoo the storm god is put in charge of the sea. So then, what does that mean for their equivalents in the Legend of Zelda? This is where the goddess statues and the bargainers come into play. Goddess statues can be found scattered around Hyrule in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, located in towns or places of importance. There are also some in Skyward Sword, but there are none in the games between. These statues represent Hylia, and the people use them to pray to her. But it gets more interesting when you consider the bargainers. Besides the smaller statues in Lookout Landing and the Great Plateau, both of them having been moved, the larger bargainer statues are located in the depths directly below the goddess statues, who are located in important locations. The goddess statues also are bathed in light, while the bargainers are underground. Like the goddess statues, Link can also pray to the bargainers as well. They are the opposite of the goddess statues, in a similar way to our moon god being the opposite of Hylia, meaning, if the goddess statues represent Hylia, then the bargainers must represent our moon god. The bargainers tell us their job is to help the lost Poes of the depths return to the afterlife, and if these bargainers do represent our moon god, then perhaps that is also his role. He is essentially the god of death, the one who makes sure the spirits of the dead can move on. If I could be poetic for a second, the light of the moon acts as a beacon for those lost in the darkness of night. Being his opposite, this also means that Hylia is the goddess of life, which does make sense. She is the protector of the peoples of Hyrule, like how she protected them when Demise attacked. And her descendants, through the bloodline of the goddess, continue this as the leaders of the people. The statues being located in the towns and important places of Hyrule are a symbol of her protection. We even have a line of dialogue from Trissa in Kakariko Village, who says the town is blessed with the protection of the goddess, which provides many healthy, happy animals and an abundance of fine crops. In general, the sun is usually associated with life and growth. Think of the statues' locations even. The goddess statues are located on the surface, in the light, close to the people, to the living, while the bargainers are located underground, hidden in the darkness of the depths, which is almost like the equivalent of the underworld, being full of lost Poes or spirits. It's almost like these statues perform the roles of the gods they represent while those gods are missing, since it's not clear if Hylia actually still exists as a god or not, and the spirit in the horned statue is, well, trapped in a statue. Why these statues don't appear until the end of the timeline could be because of the Zonai. If they are descended from the gods, or related to the gods, when they came to Hyrule, they may have reintroduced the worship of Hylia and the moon god, explaining where those statues came from. And because the evidence suggests the Zonai did not arrive until after the classic games in the series, this would explain why the statues don't return until Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. The idea of the day being connected to the living, and the night being connected with the dead, has also been referenced in the series before. In Ocarina of Time, when discovering the Sun Song, we find this inscription: "The rising sun will eventually set. A newborn's life will fade. From sun to moon, moon to sun, give peaceful rest to the living dead." The sun represents life. Its rising and setting represents a person's lifetime, and the moon represents death. From sun to moon, moon to sun could be in reference to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, a concept found in Buddhism, one of the bigger influences on the series along with Shinto. There's also Russell's dialogue at the start of Twilight Princess. Do you ever feel a strange sadness as dusk falls? They say it's the only time when our world intersects with theirs. The only time we can feel the lingering regrets of spirits who have left our world. That is why loneliness always pervades the hour of twilight. Russell is saying that their world, the world of the living, is the day, and the twilight is actually the afterlife. Midna later corrects this by commenting on how the Hylians believe the Twilight Realm is the world of the dead. But Russell's words are not completely wrong. If the day represents the living, like he says, and the night represents the dead, like we've theorized, the hours of twilight, dusk and dawn, are the times when the day becomes night and the night becomes day. These hours are the closest the two ever come to each other. The closest the world of the living comes to the world of the dead, like Russell claims. If the goddess statues represent Hylia, her being the goddess of light, the day, the sun, the living, then in comparison, our moon god of the series must be the god of darkness, the night, the moon, and the dead, the one whose role is to watch over the spirits of the dead and help them move on to the afterlife. When Demise appeared, it is said that the earth cracked open and monsters rushed out and attacked the people of the land. These monsters are Demise's followers, his favored race, his demon tribe. To protect the Triforce and the remaining humans, Hylia raised a plot of land into the sky, which became known as Skyloft. Following the events of Skyward Sword, these humans returned to the surface. They named the land Hyrule and called themselves Hylians, both in reference to Hylia. But why did the goddess only raise the Hylians up into the sky? Why not the Gorons, Mogma, or any of the other races? The Hylians are her favored people, her followers. For this theory, we could even call them the Light Tribe, the people devoted to the goddess of light. Like the connection between Hylia and our moon god, and the goddess statues and bargainers, there is a tribe that can be labeled the opposite of the Light Tribe, a group who follows the ways of our moon god, the Sheikah. In Ocarina of Time, the Sheikah are known as the Shadow Folk, and they are referred to as the Shadow of the Hylians. If the Hylians are the Light Tribe, the Sheikah can literally be called the Shadow Tribe. The sign in the graveyard of Kakariko says the Sheikah watch over the spirits of the dead, which makes sense when you consider that the Hyrule graveyard is usually in or close to Kakariko Village. The village we know is the home of the Sheikah. In Ocarina of Time, the Sage of Shadow is a Sheikah, and the Shadow Temple itself is located in the graveyard of Kakariko Village. If the Sheikah watch over the spirits of the dead, that is a direct connection to our moon god and the bargainers, since they have a similar job of helping the dead move on to the afterlife. We should also consider the Sheikah aesthetic. They're very much inspired by ninjas, which brings up ideas of stealth, secrets, hiding in the shadows, and using the darkness to their advantage, something that makes sense if their patron deity is the god of darkness. And if we go off the idea of secrets and things hidden in the shadows, concealed by darkness, think of the Sheikah artifacts we know about. Gossip stones are inconspicuously located around Hyrule and will give the different links helpful information or tell him secrets. The Mask of Truth is used in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask to talk to the Gossip Stones. It's also stated to let the user see into the mind of someone. In Skyward Sword, in the Waterfall Cave, there is a specific Gossip Stone called the Moonlight Merchant who will sell Link rare items. Wait. You're telling me that there's a Gossip Stone that is a Sheikah thing called the Moonlight Merchant? That seems a little too on the nose here, right? The Lens of Truth dispels illusions and shows us what our surroundings truly look like. And in The Wind Waker, Link can be rewarded with the Hero's Charm, a mask whose design is made up of two Sheikah eyes that reveals the health of enemies. These items, their purpose of revealing secrets and finding the truth, may be another aspect of our moon god, but there's also the Howling Stones in Twilight Princess, which allow Link to speak with the hero Shade, the spirit of the hero of time. And in Breath of the Wild, if you believe Link actually died 100 years before, it's the Shrine of Resurrection built by the Sheikah, which brings him back to life. The Howling Stones and the Shrine of Resurrection show another connection between the Sheikah and the dead. If our moon god is like the Sheikah, or I guess it would be more that the Sheikah are like him, that would explain why he's not mentioned in Skyward Sword or any of the other games. Because he was hidden or his involvement was meant to be a secret, or he's been there the entire time, we just never knew it. You might be thinking this idea of the Sheikah is wrong, because Impa in Skyward Sword tells us that the tribe was chosen by Hylia. But think of it like this. Hylia knew that one day her reincarnation would venture to the surface as part of the plan to finally destroy Demise. Who could she trust to protect ZELDA if all the Hylians were up on Skyloft? The Sheikah were chosen because they stayed on the surface, and they were the chosen people of the Moon God, so Hylia could trust them. The tribe is given the role of protecting ZELDA, a role that has been continued throughout time as the Sheikah continue to protect the royal family. But they have also been continuing the work of the Moon God by looking after the spirits of the dead in the graveyard of Hyrule. Going back to Sheikah artifacts, a point that may have gone unnoticed is that the Sheikah have a long history with masks. Like I mentioned, there is the Mask of Truth and the Hero's Charm. In Breath of the Wild, Link can purchase the Stealth Mask, a piece of Sheikah apparel fitting their ninja aesthetic. But also, the members of the Yiga, who are a splinter group of Sheikah, all wear masks themselves. Even the concept art for Impa in Skyward Sword shows her with a mask. Although this isn't technically canon, it does show that Nintendo considers the idea that masks are related to the group, even as far back as the start of the timeline. And finally, there is the existing theory that the ancient tribe mentioned in Majora's Mask, and by extension the Dark Interlopers, were actually Sheikah. The ancient tribe used Majora's Mask in their hexing rituals, and the Dark Interlopers are known for using powerful shadow magic, like the Fuse Shadow. And the Twilight, their descendants, look like they still use masks themselves. Consider the basic idea of a mask, concealing one's identity and hiding who you are, matching this idea of secrets and truth that goes with the other relics. The Sheikah, the Shadow Tribe, the group that may have been the followers of our Moon God, having a relationship to masks, leads us to a character that we haven't really talked about in this video. Let's summarize everything we've discussed, just so we're all on the same page. If the spirit in the horn statue is a god who is the opposite of Hylia, that means the spirit is the god of darkness. Jerrin tells us, when referring to Hylia and the spirit, that one cannot exist without the other, which would mean the spirit has existed as long as Hylia, all the way back before Skyward Sword. If the spirit can't be Demise, that means it's a third god. The trio of Hylia, Demise, and the spirit in the statue are very similar to the three most important gods of Shinto, one of the biggest influences on the series. Hylia represents Amaterasu, the sun god. Demise represents Susanoo, the storm god. And by process of elimination, the spirit in the horn statue must represent Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon. Looking at the similarities between the two, and the fact that the spirit in the horn statue is the opposite of Hylia, in the same way that Tsukuyomi is the opposite of Amaterasu, then the spirit in the horn statue must be the moon god of The Legend of Zelda, the god of the moon, the night, and darkness. The goddess statues and the bargainers are opposites of each other in a similar way to Hylia and the spirit in the statue. If the goddess statues represent Hylia, then the bargainers must represent our moon god. The bargainer's role is to help the spirits of the dead move on to the afterlife. And because they represent this moon god, that must also be his role, meaning he is the god of the dead for the series. And the Sheikah tribe are the followers of the moon god. They are referred to as the Shadow Folk and the shadows of the Hylians, and they protect the dead in the graveyard of Hyrule. They also show how the moon god may be related to secrets and truth as well. All of the evidence and information we can find seems to confirm that the spirit in the horn statue is indeed the moon god of The Legend of Zelda. But then, if that's the case, what does that mean for the Happy Mask salesman if he's really the one in the statue, like I suggested in part 1 of this theory? If you haven't guessed yet, I am proposing that the Happy Mask salesman is the moon god of the Legend of Zelda, the one who upset Hylia and was trapped in the horn statue at some point in the timeline. And while that may sound far-fetched, I can show you why everything points to that conclusion, including what happens in my favorite game in the series. But that requires one final video for this theory. If part 2 was all about the spirit in the horn statue, then part 3 will be all about our mysterious salesman and finally bring everything we've talked about full circle. But until then, if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments as usual. And as always, thanks for watching.